Morning. Morning.
Good afternoon, and welcome again to the Commission's press room today, 18th of July 2018. It's our pleasure to have with us Commissioner Margrethe Vestager, who will make a statement on an antitrust decision. The Commissioner will make the statement, then we'll move on to our traditional Q&A session. Without further ado, Commissioner.
Well, thank you. Today, the Commission has decided to fine Google 4.34 billion euros for breaching EU antitrust rules. Google has engaged in illegal practices to cement its dominant market position in Internet search. It must put an effective end to this conduct within 90 days or face penalty payments. Google's search engine is its flagship product. You fine? Okay. Every year, Google generates more than 95 billion US dollars from adverts, such as those shown and clicked on by users of Google Search. And much of this revenue is thanks to the rise of smart mobile devices, namely smartphones and tablets. Today, mobile internet makes more than half of global internet traffic. It has changed the lives for millions of Europeans. No matter if we're waiting for the metro or the bus, if we're in a meeting room, if we're dining with friends, more and more our hands reach for our smartphones and tablets to find the information that we're looking for. Our case is about 3 types of restrictions that Google has imposed on mobile device manufacturers and network operators to ensure that traffic goes to Google Search. First, Google has required manufacturers to pre-install the Google Search and browser apps on devices running on the Android mobile operating system. Manufacturers had to do this if they wanted to be able to sell devices with the Google App Store. Second, Google paid manufacturers and network operators to make sure that only the Google Search app was pre-installed on such devices. Third, Google has obstructed the development of competing mobile operating systems. These could have provided a platform for rival search engines to gain traffic. In this way, Google has used Android as a vehicle to cement its dominance as a search engine. These practices, they have denied rivals a chance to innovate and to compete on the merits. They have denied European consumers the benefit of effective competition in the very important mobile sphere. And this is illegal under EU antitrust rules. I would like now to tell you a bit more about 4 aspects of our case. First, why Google has implemented these practices. Second, what practices Google implemented exactly. Third, why these practices are illegal under EU antitrust rules. And finally, how our decision today will affect Google, consumers, and the marketplace. So first, what was Google's strategy? Google understood early on the shift from desktop to mobile search. It started in the mid-2000s, and it would be a fundamental change for search engine businesses. And of course, it realized that this was both an opportunity and a risk. So Google developed a strategy to anticipate the changes of the shift. This strategy was built on the mobile operating system, Android. As Google said in one of its internal documents at the time, and I quote, "Android is by far the greatest opportunity for search monetization in mobile over the next years and is very strategic to Google," end quote. Google bought the original developer of the Android operating system in 2005, and it has continued to develop Android ever since. It has been very successful. Today, around 80% of smart devices in Europe and worldwide run on Android. This is more than 2.2 billion devices in total. Each time Google releases a new version of Android, it publishes the source code online. This, in principle, allows anyone to access and modify the code to create other versions of Android, so-called Android forks. At the same time, this openly accessible Android source code only covers basic functions on mobile devices. It does not include popular Google apps like the Google Play Store, which enables users to download more than 3.3 million different apps. If manufacturers want to sell Android devices that have popular Google apps, they need to agree to Google's terms and to sign on the dotted line. And this includes requirements not to modify the Android source code without Google's consent. Through this requirement, in practice, Android is locked down in a Google-controlled ecosystem. So what are the illegal practices that Google put in place? Our case is about three specific types of restrictions. Three specific restrictions that Google has imposed on manufacturers and mobile network operators. The first practice ensures that Android device manufacturers pre-install the Google Search app and the Google Chrome browser on the devices that they sell. Search and browser apps are the most important gateways to reach search engines on mobile devices. Manufacturers had to pre-install the Google Search and the Chrome app if they wanted to sell devices that offers users a key feature, namely the possibility to download other apps via the Google Play Store. As part of our investigation, device manufacturers confirmed that users consider Google's Play Store a must-have app on Android devices. So the right to pre-install the Play Store on their device is a very strong incentive for them to agree to Google's demands, especially because it's not possible for users to download the Play Store themselves. Second, Google also wanted Google Search to be the only pre-installed search engine on Android devices. So Google gave some of the largest device manufacturers a share of the pie of Google Search revenue but only on a condition of exclusive status. It also entered into such arrangement with certain mobile network operators, which can also determine which apps are installed on the devices that they sell to consumers. At its peak, this practice covered more than 80% of Android devices sold in Europe. Google stopped this practice after the Commission started to look into it. Our investigation has shown that for search apps and mobile browsers, pre-installation on devices is an advantage that cannot be matched in any way. The figures, they speak for themselves. In 2016, more than 95% of all search queries on Android devices were made via Google Search. These devices had Google Search and Google Chrome pre-installed. On Windows mobile systems or their devices, on the other hand, well, Google Search Engine was not pre-installed. As a result, less than 25% of all search queries was made via Google Search. And more than 75% of the queries, well, they happened on Bing, which is the pre-installed search engine on Windows mobile devices. There is a saying that you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Well, evidence shows that when it comes to search apps and mobile browsers, the vast majority of users simply take what comes with their device and do not download competing apps. In fact, these apps are not even for free, since users pay with their data. Or, to slightly paraphrase what also economist Milton Friedman has said, there ain't no such thing as a free search. The third practice Google has put in place, as already mentioned, prevents device manufacturers from using any alternative version of Android that was not approved by Google. If manufacturers produced even a single device based on an Android fork, they lose the right to sell any device with Google Play Store or the Google Search app. And this is how Google restricts the opportunity and incentive for others to develop Android forks in a way that is not open to all. At the same time, this reduces the opportunity for rival search engines and others to launch apps and services on devices running on Android forks. And this was not just a remote possibility from theory books. In 2012 and 2013, Amazon tried to license to device manufacturers its Android fork called Fire OS. It wanted to cooperate with manufacturers to increase its chances of commercial success. And manufacturers were interested. But due to Google's restrictions, manufacturers could not launch Fire OS on even a single device. They would have lost the right to sell any Android phone with key Google apps. Nowadays, very few devices run with Fire OS, namely only those manufactured by Amazon themselves. And this is not a proportionate outcome. Google is entitled to set technical requirements to ensure that functionality and apps within its own Android ecosystem runs smoothly. But these technical requirements cannot serve as a smokescreen to prevent the development of competing Android ecosystems. Google cannot have its cake and eat it. So why are these practices illegal under EU rules? In Europe, well, of course, we congratulate all companies for success, the success that they achieve through innovation, developing products that consumers value. And that is why, as such, dominance is not a problem under EU antitrust rules. But with market dominance comes a responsibility. And that's because when one company dominates the marketplace, obviously competition is weakened. So, EU antitrust rules put a special responsibility on dominant companies. They must not deny other companies the chance to compete against them on the merits. Of course, because that would be to the detriment of further innovation and therefore harm European consumers. Through its control over Android, Google is dominant in the market for mobile operating systems which are available to license to other manufacturers. And Google has been dominant in this market since 2011. Our most recent figures show that it holds a market share of more than 95%. The second biggest player in this market, Windows Mobile, was very small in comparison. It had a market share of less than 5% before exiting the market last year. Other mobile operating systems, like those of Apple and BlackBerry, they are not available for license. They do not directly compete with Android at the level of device manufacturers. Of course, Android phones, they compete with Apple and BlackBerry phones for end consumers, but our investigation showed that that does not sufficiently constrain Google's power vis-à-vis device manufacturers and network operators. Our decision also concludes that Google is dominant in two other markets, namely the App Store for the Android mobile operating system and in general Internet search. As regards app stores, Google Play Store accounts for more than 90% of app downloads on Android devices. As regards general Internet search, the Google search engine holds very high market shares of over 90% in most European countries, and that we already showed in the Google shopping decision last year. This means that Google must comply with EU antitrust rules for dominant companies. And the decision today concludes that the restrictions Google imposed on manufacturers and network operators using Android have breached these rules since 2011. First, that's because Google's practices have denied rival search engines the possibility to compete on the merits. They made sure that Google's search engine is pre-installed on practically all Android devices, which is an advantage that cannot be matched. And by making payments to major manufacturers and network operators on condition that no other search app or search engine was pre-installed. Well, then rivals were excluded from this opportunity. In this way, Google also denied rivals access to valuable data from increased user traffic, which in turn could have allowed rivals to improve their products. Furthermore, Google's practices also harmed competition and further innovation in the wider mobile space, beyond just Internet search. And that's because they prevented other mobile browsers from competing effectively with the pre-installed Google Chrome browser. Finally, they obstructed the development of Android forks. This could have provided a platform for rival search engines as well as other app developers to thrive. So finally, the consequences of this decision. The fine of 4.34 billion euros reflects the seriousness and the sustained nature of Google's violation of EU antitrust rules. The decision requires Google to bring its illegal conduct to an end within 90 days in an effective manner. At a minimum, our decision requires Google to stop and not to re-engage in the three types of restrictions that I have described. In other words, our decision stops Google from controlling which search and browser apps manufacturers can pre-install on Android devices or which Android operating system they can adopt. But it is Google's sole responsibility to make sure that it changes its conduct in a way that brings the infringement to an effective end. We will monitor this very closely. If Google fails to comply with our decision, it would be subject to penalty payments. The penalty would be up to 5% of the average daily turnover of Alphabet, Google's parent, for each day of non-compliance. We would have to establish this in a separate Commission decision, which the penalty would be backdated when the non-compliance started. So, our decision requires Google to change the way it operates and face the consequences of its action. About a year ago, I was here in the press room to tell you about another separate decision concerning Google. The Commission fined Google 2.42 billion euros for abusing its dominance as a search engine by giving an illegal advantage to its own shopping comparison service. We have not yet taken a position on whether Google has complied with the decision. And since we haven't done so, this remains very much an open question. Furthermore, the Commission also continues to investigate Google's business practices concerning other vertical search services and AdSense. I cannot prejudge the outcome of these ongoing investigations, which continue to be a top priority for us. So to conclude, what our ongoing work and today's decision have in common is the principle that in Europe, companies must compete on the merits. Any company is welcome to do business in our single market. But they need to comply. They need to play by EU antitrust rules. And these rules are set in place for a very simple reason: to protect European consumers and effective competition. And this matters, especially in digital markets. Technology companies have enormous potential of doing us good. But establishing people's trust that technology serves us and not the other way around is more important than ever. Competition enforcement can make a difference here. It can give people the confidence that technology companies play fair and do not close off markets to competition. Otherwise, they will be sanctioned, as Google was today. But we also need effective regulation, including data protection rules that ensure our data is not being misused, and rules that make sure that online platforms operate in a transparent way. And that is why I work hand in hand with my colleagues Andrus Ansip, Maria Gabriel and Vera Jourova to build the trust we need to make sure that digital markets truly serve European consumers. Thank you.